Good afternoon. This is Inside Look. I'm Neil Mercado. Just over a month after President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos and the Chinese President Xi Jinping's discussion on the West Philippine Sea, another incident transpired between Manila and Beijing in the disputed waters. The Philippine Coast Guard has accused a Chinese Coast Guard ship of directing a military-grade laser at one of its vessels that temporarily blinded the Filipino crew aboard. But China rejects this, saying they only used handheld laser speed detector and a handheld green light pointer to measure the distance and speed of the Philippine vessel. China also accused the Philippines of intruding into their territory. To discuss this, joining us today over a phone is Philippine Coast Guard Commodore J. Tarriela, spokesperson on the West Philippine Sea concerns. Good afternoon, Commodore Tarriela. Thanks for joining us on today's program.
Good afternoon, Neil, and good afternoon to all your viewers.
Sir, let's talk about the recent incident in the West Philippine Sea. This happened merely a month after the meeting between President Marcos and Chinese President Xi Jinping. China rejected the Philippine Coast Guard's account of the incident. What's your take on this?
Well, for the Philippine Coast Guard, there are actually three things that we would like to highlight. No? First, our crew of BRP Malapascua, while supporting the law mission of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, was actually a victim of their military-grade laser. No? It caused temporary blindness from 10 to 15 seconds. And there's no reason for the Philippine Coast Guard to make up this story. If they are claiming that this laser was just merely used for measuring the distance and the speed of the Philippine Coast Guard vessel, it's not. It is something that is contestable, considering that they have radar on board their vessel to basically learn about the details of our navigation. And then third, if they're arguing that they are more concerned on the navigational safety between these two Coast Guard vessels in the dangerous waters in the West Philippine Sea, why would they even do dangerous maneuvers as close as 150 yards to our Philippine Coast Guard vessel, which is pretty much very small compared to the size of their China Coast Guard vessel?
Any update on the condition of the Filipino crew affected by this incident, sir?
Well, by the time that they have arrived port, no, they were checked by medical officers of the Philippine Coast Guard, and so far right now there are no permanent impairedness of their vision.
For the information of our viewers, Commodore Tarriela, I want to ask this. What is the protocol for the Philippine Coast Guard when these things happen? Because this is not the first time that this happened. In fact, please correct me if I'm wrong, but in June last year, a Chinese Navy ship directed its searchlight at the BRP Habagat for around 20 minutes. So in terms of protocol, what should be the immediate move from the Philippine Coast Guard when these things happen?
Well, for the Philippine Coast Guard, we have our own rules on the use of force, but it's more of a evasive maneuver, no, to prevent so much exposure from the laser. But the point is, if the China Coast Guard will consistently, point those lasers, we don't have any other means to shelter our crew. We're just completely exposed dun sa bridge area of the vessel.
And not to mention the dangers that come with it, sir, especially if, according to the Philippine Coast Guard, some of the crew members of our ship were temporarily blinded by these lasers.
Yes.
So with this incident, sir, what do you think is the message that China is trying to send to the Philippines?
Well, they are just, claiming that they have complete control of Ayungin Shoal, which basically falls on our exclusive economic zone. They're also wanting to, prevent the Philippine government vessels from persistently patrolling our own exclusive economic zone. But for the Philippine Coast Guard, no matter what the dangers that it will bring, even for the safety of our crew and our vessels, no matter how small our vessels are compared to their vessels, the Philippine Coast Guard will still heed to the call of our President Bongbong Marcos through the leadership of Admiral Artemio Abu. We will constantly patrol our waters and to ensure the protection and welfare of our Filipino fishermen.
Mhm. You mentioned the Filipino fishermen, sir. The stories that we've been hearing about Chinese vessels pushing away Filipino fishermen there in the West Philippine Sea. We've heard numerous stories about this. So, sir, would you call this recent incident in the West Philippine Sea a form of harassment on China's part?
Yes, for the Chinese Coast Guard, they have been harassing our Filipino fishermen. They are also, harassing Philippine Coast Guard vessels for a lot of instances already. I think the only reason why public had been more aware right now, it's because our approach right now is to expose their aggressive behavior, their bullying tactics, and in the West Philippine Sea.
Sir, through the years of tension between the Philippines and China in the West Philippine Sea, a topic of discussion that's always been present is the importance of having a presence in these waters. So, would you say that we have enough presence in the West Philippine Sea, especially compared to China? Because, after all, in so many ways, the Coast Guard serves as our first line of defense in these waters.
Well, that's one of the main reasons why the Philippine Coast Guard is asking our lawmakers to support the Philippine Coast Guard modernization. It is about time that we need to acquire more offshore patrol vessels that can constantly patrol the Philippine exclusive economic zone. As of this time, the Philippine Coast Guard has only three offshore patrol vessels. One came from France and two from Japan. Well, as you may be aware, West Philippine Sea is so vast, and these three ships won't be enough, no, to protect our Filipino fishermen.
Sir, just to give our viewers a picture of what usually happens in the West Philippine Sea, can you give us maybe a picture of what a usual day of the Coast Guard is in terms of patrolling in these contested waters?
Well, it's not the West Philippine Sea is so vast. There are only areas that the Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Maritime Militia is actually positioning their vessels. So it doesn't mean that the entire vast area of the West Philippine Sea is totally occupied by these Chinese government ships. No, the same thing for the Philippine Coast Guard. We only have a very few vessels. So every time that we learn about Filipino fishermen being harassed in one particular area, that's our priority where we are going to deploy our vessel. Secondly, in terms of prioritizing the places that we're going to patrol, we also focus on those areas that are reported that it is being occupied or swarmed by Chinese maritime militia. So the day-to-day activity of the Philippine Coast Guard vessels, although it's very few, is pretty much dependent on the information that are being forwarded to the national headquarters. One is the Filipino fishermen. Second is the swarming of the Chinese maritime militia in a particular unoccupied feature which belongs to the Philippines exclusive economic zone.
Sir, as pointed out by retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, the Chinese Coast Guard allows its personnel to use force in implementing its nine-dash line claim. So the recent incident opened new discussions on the possibility of invoking the Mutual Defense Treaty and possibly calling on our foreign allies. Do you agree with this?
Well, as a Coast Guard officer, it's beyond my pay grade, no, Neil. It's the calling out for the mutual defense treaty is left for the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Department of National Defense, and of course our Commander in Chief, the President, to decide on this. For me to be asked on that particular question, I would not give my opinion. I choose not to give my opinion, Neil.
Okay, sir. For the Coast Guard, what happens next? What is the next move for the Philippine Coast Guard?
Uh, for for the Philippine Coast Guard, Neil, you can still rely on the Philippine Coast Guard that we will still be patrolling our waters. You can still rely on our commitment that we will still be able to protect our fishermen. And of course, third, we are appealing to our lawmakers to support the modernization of the Philippine Coast Guard. This, as you have said, Coast Guard vessels is our top priority in um, deploying government ships in the West Philippine Sea. So it is about time that the Philippine government reconsider in acquiring more vessels for the Philippine Coast Guard so that we can have more presence in the West Philippine Sea.
My last question for you, sir, would be, it's the Coast Guard na talagang nakaka-experience, sir, nitong mga encounters in the West Philippine Sea. So, sir, how would you describe the current situation over there in the context of Philippines and China?
Context in the Philippines and China. Um, I I think with our president right now, he is really as a Coast Guard officer in complying with the guidance of our Commander in Chief. I think the president right now prioritizes the importance of our sovereign rights in the exclusive economic zone. Regardless of our diplomatic relationship with China, this is something that he doesn't want to compromise. And for China, no matter how good we are in terms of diplomatic relationship, I think the problem has always been with them of not being true to their commitment of any diplomatic negotiation that are always discussed already, but in reality, it's the other way around. So, as far as the national government is concerned, we are pushing for a positive diplomatic relationship with China. But at the same time, as what the president said, we're not going to surrender even a square inch of our territory in the West Philippine Sea.
That's a very interesting take, sir, because as you know, the statement from China claims that we are intruding into their territory,
Yes.
which could be further from truth because, as you know, we already have the arbitration ruling on this. Thank you so much, Commodore J. Tarriela. We appreciate giving us your time.
Thank you, Neil.
You're watching Inside Look. We'll just take a quick break. More discussion on the recent incident in the West Philippine Sea when we return. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Paul Sumayaw.
I'm Jedi Directo, and we're owners of Barbera Barbershop here in Laguna.
Barbera is a wordplay between Barbie, which is kind of also a slur, no? Especially sa mga effeminate gays. But there was a viral video that came out na sabi ko na nga pa Barbie. Parang there was na may batang pumili ng Barbie. We kind of led with that. And Barbie has always been associated with kabaklaan. And then we also paired it with barbero, which is, the Filipino term for barbers. Sabi nila, haircuts are generally historically gendered, no? Barbershops are for men, salons are for women. And that's what Barbera is for. We wanted to create that conversation na hindi kailangan, may gender distinction ang haircuts ng babae at lalaki or anyone in between. Coming from personal experience, would take two brothers to the barbershop. Kahit out and proud ako noon sa Camarines Sur, I was young, I was in my teens. Still, it's uncomfortable because parang they would look at me. I had to sort of scale down the way I look in this na I would go for the floral prints. Pag pupunta kami sa barbero ng Kapambayan, maluwag na basketball shorts. So I would borrow from uncles or cousins. That level of discomfort pa lang without even someone initiating it is really, kind of a horrific experience na parang nagkagaling sa loob.
It's really more trying to act, boyish, diba? Kasi parang that's how you want to get treated normally, diba? Parang I was always conscious of, not trying to be too effeminate. Nung bata ako, conscious ako doon kasi parang may uncles, may titas would always call me out on that. Diba? Kasi parang dapat lalaki ganito.
Being a safe space essentially means that you're able to become your authentic self within that space. Kasi if may spaces na hindi safe for you, then of course you'd actually essentially look for a safe space. We would encounter customers, especially the trans-masculine customers. They kind of like the fact that we address them properly, especially yung mga, the trans-masculine lesbians. They kind of like the fact na we address them as sir or boss or chief. Kind of a horrifying story for them na pag pumunta sila ng salon, ma'am. Pag pumunta sa barbershop, ma'am pa din. May mga customers kami who would open up na sila mismo yung nag-open up. And that's how we liked it. Kasi the fact that they're opening up, that's a good sign for us na we're doing our job as a safe space.
Yung training talaga pinaka tumatak sa isip ko doon yung parang discrimination. Lahat ng nakakasalamuha mo, hindi mo pala alam yung tunay na gender, ganun. Diba parang respect mo lang.
We're trying to think about like parang what a queer barbershop should actually look like. Basically, we kind of like settled on the idea na it doesn't really have to parang show its queerness right off the bat, but announcing ourselves as queer owners who welcome anybody, diba, in this safe space.
Yeah.
Yun is enough.
You're watching Inside Look. Our discussion on recent laser incident between the Philippines and China continues. With us today is Dr. Chester Cabalza, founding president of the International Development and Security Cooperation. Chester, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for your invitation.
Chester, you got a chance to listen to our discussion with Commodore Tarriela, and I asked him this question. And I want to ask you the same question. What is the message that China is trying to send with this recent incident?
Well, of course, I agree with how he framed his thinking there. But of course, we are consistent with our advocacy that this is part of our territory. But of course, China would want to say otherwise because, of course, it's now part of the cognitive warfare where you have two different versions of truth. China thinks that these are part of their territories as part of the rejuvenation policy, in which all of the lost territories, including those of the features in the West Philippine Sea and the entirety of the South China Sea, including Taiwan Strait and Taiwan itself, will be part of their territories by the time they will celebrate their centennial anniversary.
That's a good point you raised because the China and Philippines, it's been a very interesting story to follow so far. And as pointed out by Commodore J. Tarriela, the Philippines has been consistent with its point that we will fight for our sovereignty, that we want to maintain a friendly ties with with foreign nations. But it's China that's not holding its end of the deal. So what can you say about that?
Well, I think it's a doctrinal problem. The situation in South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea is very complex. Let's look at the strategic aspect, looking at its doctrines there. Of course, I also studied in the National Defense University in Beijing, and of course they are very consistent with their narratives ever since when I started when I studied there in 2011. Then 2012, you have the problem in the Scarborough Shoal, and they continued with their militarization and of course with their reclamation activities there, and now it's almost perfect. 90% of those reclamation activities are almost complete, and they have militarized it, and they have achieved so much in terms of their terrestrial expansion. China is a terrestrial power, even if it's trying to become a naval power. But after beyond South China Sea, they cannot get out. and also they don't have any combat experience in their naval capacity. That's the reason why our partners and allies are very clever earlier when they proposed for that Indo-Pacific strategy, and they know that the Philippines will play a major role in this in their differing strategies in the Indo-Pacific. Let's take into consideration the lawfare. We achieved so much when it comes to soft power. The world has acclaimed us. The they had a lot of accolades on us when it comes to when it comes to soft power through the lawfare. I think we have also helped Philippine Coast Guard on realizing their main mandate and their purpose when it comes to maritime patrol and security. And in fact, even if they are fall under the Department of Transportation, they are wearing two hats as a civilian bureaucracy, but at the same time, they have also their military mandate to protect our territory. And of course, in patrolling the maritime domains, this is the turf of the white ships through the Coast Guard. You cannot put the gray ships there or the Navy because that would connote war. That's the reason why. But on the other hand, China has also revised their China Coast Guard law in 2021 at the peak of the pandemic. So you have to look at the different context there. And now they are using the lasers, which is also a form of electronic warfare. So they are dealing and using different forms of warfare there. You have cognitive warfare, of course, their diplomats using the wolf warrior diplomacy, and then lately they are using their soft power through the increasing number of the Confucius Institutes, and then of course forming a lot of alumni association for the military who studied in Beijing, and you have all these sorts there. But the point here is that it's a continuous saga out there. So what can the Coast Guard do right now, given that of course they have a special mandate in protecting?
Chester,
Yes.
we're losing you a bit. You were saying?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've been telling to watchers and listeners that of course we have empowered basically the Philippine Coast Guard, because of course it Coast Guard is wearing two hats as a civilian bureaucracy, but at the same time it has military mandates also. And right now, the way China is putting teeth into their China Coast Guard law is something that we have to consider. Remember that in 2021, they have revised their China Coast Guard law, putting more strength and teeth to their law that gives them the capacity to, of course, to bar all those foreign aggressors based from their own perspective. And now they are using the laser as a form of protecting their territories. But of course, these are new technologies, new weaponries. The laser, military grade lasers, are forms of radiation. These are infrared, and it can even get information once you, of course, no, you use that infrared to anyone or to a ship or to a vessel, and it's a very dangerous because it's a form of weaponry. It falls part under the electronic warfare, as we may call it.
The question now, Chester, is our strategy right now working? Because time and again, we have seen these incidents happen in the West Philippine Sea, despite the supposed agreement between Beijing and Manila. So, is our strategy working?
Well, the recent visit of President Bongbong, when it comes to the establishment of the hotlines, which is not yet an agreement because it was a memorandum of understanding, which was a rehash of the 2017 Coast Guard diplomacy. Remember that they already proposed that, and after that we saw a lot of miscommunications and miscalculations because of their many atrocities and of course many misbehaviors they did in the West Philippine Sea. They rammed us, they had the cannon water, and then now they are using the laser and then they have prevented our fishermen, fisher folks to fish in our in our traditional fishing areas. So those are some of the things that they have already done with us, and now they are provoking us. And the mere fact that our coast guards are not biting their provocations, that's a clever move. Now, your question is, are we doing the right thing? Well, diplomacy is the first line of defense. And the mere fact the president called out the attention, summoned the ambassador, means that we are in control of the situation. It's very symbolic. But of course, what can we do about symbols here? The mere fact that you have a diplomatic protest, thousands already of diplomatic protests. We're having the biggest military exercise with the U.S. Come April. That is also a way of complementary help with the Americans, because the U.S. needs us vis-a-vis. We also need their technology, their expertise, their expertise when it comes to gathering information, and of course their high-end technology, military weaponry. And definitely the laser technology will be discussed because it falls under the electronic warfare. So and of course you have to continue with the modernization of the armed forces and the Philippine Coast Guard, because that's the only way. And by doing that, you have to improve your economy, because if your economy is weak, how can you buy sophisticated technology? So you see all the equation there. That's the reason why you should have good leadership, improve the economy, tell to the people, to the Filipino people, that we are using our taxes for the improvement and modernization of our armed forces and the Coast Guard, because these are public investments. These are our money. And then of course, you need also the credible defense posture of our armed forces. You see all the triangulation there. If we can use that properly, diplomacy, economy, and security, then we are in good shape. We saw that in Vietnam and Indonesia, and that China was hesitant in disturbing them. And if respect begets respect. If they see that our armed forces is respectable, then they will respect our territories, because we are ready to fight with them. And China cannot afford to wage war and go to fight, because of course they want to maintain their good neighborliness policy. And of course, as a super as an ambitious regional power and future superpower, they want to project that they are a good neighbor, that they are a good brother, big brother to us. So they cannot just go and wage war. The mere fact that they lack combat experience, they bully us. That's the way. It's a defense mechanism. That's the reason why they keep on continuing doing that, because they cannot afford to wage war with us, because they know that our allies and partners are ready to support us. Same as true with our allies, because nobody would want to go to war. That's the reason why you have to do a lot of intimidation, just like China is doing. So we have to counter all those intimidations. If they are using this laser technology, which we call it the light wars, because these are like dazzlers, then we have to hone that technology also. Let's teach our army, the officers of the armed forces and the Philippine Coast Guard about these military grade lasers, because these are forms of electronic warfare, and then you have the cognitive warfare. It's just using different kinds of warfare methods here. Don't be intimidated. You counter it.
Chester, not to mention the very important location of the Philippines, especially in the
Yeah,
context
geography.
of the conflict between China and the United States. Now let's talk about that. President Bongbong Marcos recently visited Japan, and the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd James Austin III also visited the Philippines. The U.S. and the Philippines agreed to 4 more EDCA sites. So clearly, there is movement in terms of strengthening our military allyship with other countries. So what role would these recent developments play in the context of the recent incident in the West Philippine Sea?
Okay, I have 3 reasons for that. One is they saw that the Philippines has a good geography, and whether or not China would ally with us because they are strategic partners, or the U.S. because they are treaty allies, and other partners like Japan and so on. They knew that the Philippines is in the right position. It has good geography. Part of the first island chain that whenever there would be a war that would erupt in in of course in the West Philippine Sea, and of course I'm sorry for that. There's some noise in my background. We one moment.
Yeah, yes, Chester.
Yeah, one moment because
Okay.
okay,
We'll
right.
go back
I'm
to.
back.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Here, well, what I'm trying to drive at here is that, of course, um, geography is very important, and we have that geography. And secondly, um, now that the U.S. is very confident in laying down its Indo-Pacific strategy, they think that these alliance and partnership will work because definitely we have common interests and common concern against China because of the threat that China is of course no is using it on their favor. And then another thing would be the Philippines has become a middle power already. Meaning to say that we can influence great powers or superpowers. That's the reason why they are competing to get our attention, and they want to ally with us because we are an asset to both of them or to anyone. And the point here is that we have to seize this momentum because ultimately we saw the importance of our geography. We have war experience in the past 5 years. We have the Marawi siege. That is a very good combat experience for the Philippines. That's the reason why other major powers are also getting us because they wanted to learn from us. And thirdly, we are a good partner. We saw that when we partnered with the US, we've been very faithful to them, and although we saw asymmetrical relationship with them, and during the time of President Duterte, we challenged them, and now they realize some of their mistakes, and they're trying to rectify it. Now with China, we gave them the opportunity to partner with us, but we lack confidence, and they continue with their tactics, operations, and strategies. That's why we lost confidence with them. And that's the reason why that if they really would want to engage with us, they have good intentions with us, then they can withdraw their claims in the West Philippine Sea. Imagine that. I'd like to take the example of Vietnam. They have centuries old love and hate relationship with China. Originally, you have 11 dash line there. And because of the diplomacy and continuous love-hate relationship of Vietnam with China, it was reduced to 9 dash line. That's what we know right now, the 11 dashes line. So if we continue with that, then perhaps in the future, China can spare us because we were able to confront their challenges. The mere fact that they are challenging us because they knew that we are weak. If we don't, if we show to them that we are stronger, that we have the power to partner and ally, and we have a strong capability militarily, and our economy is respectable, and our people are resilient and are resisting, and then China will recognize that because China is inevitable. Whether or not China will lose this war or whenever, if ever there will be war, China will still be a great power. China will be in that system of the future world stage. It will become a great power. But of course, we'll see because we also have to consider that China is an economic power that of course they are it's an aging country because they're no longer the world's largest population. The productivity level is going down, and fertility rate is falling also. But the point there is if China cannot make it by 2030 to become an economic power, then forget it. It will never become an economic power as number one economy, but it will still continue as a major country because they have achieved so much for the past 40 years, and that is a human's achievement so far. We have to recognize also the achievements of China, but on the other hand, it just so happened that their actions in the contested islands, which we call the West Philippine Sea, are not suited to our interest. They are competing because they have a policy, and it is ruled by Xi Jinping on its third term, and who is dictating the terms right now on the People's Liberation Army. We still do not know if the successor of Xi Jinping will have the same thinking. No, it's same true as what is happening in Russia-Ukraine war, where you have Putin there. These are revisionist leaders, world leaders. So these are just temporary things. If it goes to war, then we have to fight. That's the reason why we are now preparing ourselves. We have military exercises. We have renewed our alliance ship with with the United States. We are expanding our strategic partnerships with Japan, South Korea, European powers, and so on. And we are echoing a lot of things on the maritime rules-based norms. We won an arbitration award. We have civil war experience. Our soldiers are resilient. Our economy are growing, and we have young people, and we should encourage them to become nationalistic and patriotic. So this is not just an issue about the military. It should be an issue for every Filipinos. We saw that in amongst Ukrainians. The resistance is very strong when in times of crisis and wars. Maybe we can see that when the time comes. But of course, we never pray for any war. But for the meantime, since there is no direct war right now, because it's like a cold warrior, it's more on ideological and a lot of harassments and world wars. Basically we have to prepare. That's the reason why we need to do a lot of contingency measures, because preparation is part of all these things. No, China is showing us the sophistication of the art of war, and we have to counter everything there. We also have a strategic culture, although episodic, but I think we've been dealing with this since 1990s with the mischief reef, and then of course you have 2012 this Scarborough Shoal, and then Whitsun Reef in 2019, and now you have the
It's a good
laser
thing
incident
you, sorry to
2015.
cut you, Chester. It's a good thing you mentioned that because that brings me to my next point. You briefly touched on this earlier, the difference and similarities in the foreign
Mm.
policy of the Duterte administration and the Marcos
Mm.
administration. So would you say that these visits, particularly with our relationship with the United States and the Japan, would you say that these are an indication as to where the Marcos administration's foreign policy is headed?
Actually, he's in the right position right now after all the previous, because of the experiences, of our experiences with the previous administrations. During the time of President Aquino, we pivoted to the US, to Washington. During the time of President Duterte, we pivoted to Beijing, to China, and we drew a lot of comparisons and contrast that. We should have learned a lot from those foreign policies during the two previous administrations. Now we are in a full circle. Now we have learned how the Americans behave, how they think. We have called their attention because of the asymmetrical relationship that they showed to us. We have corrected it, and so with China, we've seen that during the time of President Duterte, the continuous injustices that they've done to us, despite our friendly relations with that. And the appeasement policy didn't work. Now you have the neutrality policy, and we're trying to weigh things because the power competition in the region has intensified, which Malacanang has also observed. But the point here now is that China is still not listening to us, to our demands, because we know these are two party. They wanted bilateralism, so you talk together. It seems like China is putting their upper hand to us. They just want to be listened, and they want they demand a lot of things from us. So what do they want? Should we withdraw our arbitration award? Should we give away our islands to them? What do they want from us? They are not telling us what they want from us. What they do is intimidation. They are very friendly to us during diplomatic visits, but on the ground, it's very different. So you see some schizophrenic actions here. It's a mismatch. So the way here is that although the behavior of China is different because it's an Asian power and we are also an Asian country, we could understand the mindset, the gestures, but it seems like it's so hard to understand China because they are not very open to what they wanted from us. They say very positive words during visits. They have good visions for the region, but on the ground, it's very different. So you see all these gaps, and China could not even tell to us what they really wanted. That's the reason why you see a lot of confusions. You see a lot of misreadings and mi- mi- miscalculations there. No, now if we have arranged already for Coast Guard diplomacy in 2000 in 2017, you could have already perfected that. Imagine you are engaging with countries, with difficult countries, and with different interests, and you're just assuming that you understand and put you demand so much from them, and and China wants that we understand them. When in fact, they we cannot understand them because they're not telling us what they really wanted from us. And now, of course, our strategy as part of our defense mechanism is to ally and partner with our traditional allies because we know that we have common interests and common concerns.
Chester, a couple of questions more for you. Um, in my research, there's this very interesting comment you made in one of your interviews. You said that President Marcos's visit to China will determine his foreign policy strategy. So, is it about time that President Marcos, given what happened recently and given that this happened only a month after that supposed agreement between him and the Chinese President Xi Jinping, is it about time that we start steering towards a more aggressive foreign policy?
You know,
Because the Marcos administration has always been consistent in saying that we have to maintain friendly ties with our, especially with our neighboring countries. So is it about time that we start becoming more aggressive with our foreign policy?
when you say aggressive, you mean we have to do something against China? You know, it's like this,
Maybe a
no?
more concrete action beyond the filing and note verbals. And
Okay.
maybe perhaps one indication would be President Marcos summoning the Chinese envoy to
We
discuss
we
this
did
issue.
that only this week, and the context of visiting China, although it was postponed originally, that should be last year, and way back. That's before the third term of President Xi. When he came back there, it was already the third term of President Xi, and China was in bad shape. They have failed the COVID policy, zero COVID policy, and then their economy is not in good shape, and then of course there are some hardliners against President Xi Jinping, and of course some internal problems in Beijing basically. So that was the situation of China when President Marcos arrived in Beijing, and the timing is not so good because Beijing is not in good shape when our president visited. So that means that what we captured from Beijing's intention with us is not so also good. We were actually disappointed because we thought that it would be elevated, but what they proposed for us would be the durian diplomacy and the four stages of infrastructure support, people-to-people engagement, and digital economy, and so on. So those were and the hotline basically. But a week after he went to Beijing, you saw again those dilemma in the West Philippine Sea. It didn't. We thought that Beijing was not genuine to us in terms of that high level talk, and
It's
that's the
very
reason why I keep
interesting, Chester,
yeah.
that the conversation between the two leaders revolved around a compromise in the West Philippine Sea. I mean, the point there is what is there to compromise if it's
That's
ours?
the point. What can you compromise when you are unilateral in your own demand? You wanted to China wants that we accept their demands without listening or accepting also our demands. It should be a compromise. But the point here is that the visit to Beijing was a real disappointment because instead of of um, of putting solutions to these complex solutions to complex problems, uh, it didn't materialize. That's the reason why uh, we focus our attention to the US, and they gave us concrete programs. That's the difference between China and the US. The US was deprived for the past 6 years because of our engagement with China, and now they are very good in telling and giving us concrete plans and programs. You know, we're talking about a relationship, and in a relationship you have to nurture it. It just so happened that our relationship right now with the US has given us a brighter future in terms of the concrete programs that they wanted for our national security. But for China, we didn't get concrete plans for our future with them. Instead, what we saw was a proposal for a hotline, and after that, we experienced another round of and series of intimidation coming from them, from our fisher folks. And remember, our fishermen are very important because they are part of our national interest. No politician would dare to sacrifice our people. That's the reason why if that's the reason why our president is very clever also on how to deal with these issues. And now he saw that we have a better future with the Americans because we have common interests. China cannot even give us the concrete plans that they wanted for us.
Chester, my final question, if you could
Mm,
entertain one question from our
right.
viewer. One viewer is asking us, do you think these things would happen if we still have a U.S. bases here in the Philippines?
You know, it's a good thing they left in 1991 because we saw our resiliency and we thought that that makes us a nation state because we were able to hurdle all the challenges, and thanks to natural disaster Mount Pinatubo also, Mother Nature. And with that, we saw that in the succeeding administrations led by Filipino presidents, we were able to survive and felt that we are a sovereign state, and we were able to also improve our economy, although still we are improving it, and also the democratization process. And then we have realized that our handicap is the military, and then we have modernized it and then revitalized it again into modernization, and then we are now modernizing the Philippine Coast Guard. That should an independent nation should be doing. The self-help, we have to help ourselves. Don't rely so much with those superpowers and then partners because they have vested interests. The way they help us and reassure us, they're also kapalit, no? They will get something from us also. So remember that these are relationships. So it's good they left, and now they need us more than we need them. So for me, the good thing is that we have realized our strengths, our potentials, our capabilities. And we have strengths and potentials. And we should be proud of our achievements so far.
Thank you, Chester. That's Chester, Dr. Chester Cabalza. We appreciate giving us your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Neil.
That has been your Inside Look. Our nightly newscast, Inquirer Today, airs live on weekdays, 6 p.m. on INQUIRER.net's online channels. Follow INQUIRER.net on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Reddit. For more stories, visit INQUIRER.net. Good afternoon.